It's funny how people think they're smart when they're really just predictable. My wife thought she was clever, thought she was careful, thought she was untouchable. But people like her always make the same mistake. They get comfortable. They start slipping. And when they slip, I don't need to do anything. The truth finds its own way out. The night it happened, I was in the living room, watching TV with the kids. Just another regular evening, except it wasn't. I had already suspected for weeks, no, months. The late nights, the sudden gym sessions, the way she'd come home looking exhausted but not from work. I wasn't blind. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions. I let her dig her own grave, one excuse at a time. And that night, she did the one thing I had been waiting for. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked. Now, let me be clear. I'm not the kind of guy who sneaks around looking for trouble. I don't need to. The truth always reveals itself to those who are patient. But that night, I didn't even have to touch her phone, because my son did. It started with a ding. A message popped up. My son, being the curious 12-year-old he is, walked over and glanced at the screen. And then, he frowned. Dad, who's Oliver? That was the moment everything changed. I looked at him, then at the phone. The message was still there, bright and bold against the screen. I miss you already. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Love you. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. For a split second, I felt something deep, something raw, but I didn't let it show. No outburst. No breakdown. Just a cold, controlled exhale. Because this was exactly what I needed. Put it down, son, I said, voice steady. He obeyed, but his little mind was already racing. I saw it in his face. The way his brows knitted together. The way his fingers curled into his sleeves. Kids aren't clueless. They see more than we give them credit for. Who's Oliver? He asked again. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about some pitiful betrayal from a woman who had once sworn loyalty to me. This was about them. Our kids. She hadn't just been lying to me. She had been lying to them too. I crouched down to his level, looked him in the eyes, and gave him the only honest answer I could. I don't know, buddy, I said, because technically, I didn't. But I would soon. And I would make sure she was the one to explain it to him. I picked up the phone, still unlocked, and started scrolling. She was sloppy. Hundreds of messages. Pictures. Plans. Reservations. A whole second life neatly tucked away in a chat bubble. And then, something else. A different name. Not just Oliver. Jake. I almost laughed. 2 men? No, that was just insulting. I heard footsteps behind me, my daughter, 15, standing there, arms crossed. She'd seen it too. I could tell by the way her face had drained of color. Dad? Her voice was small. Hesitant. I turned the phone off. Don't worry about it, I said. But she wasn't naive either. Her eyes flickered to the phone, then to my face. I could see it in her expression she already knew. Maybe she had known for a while, but she hadn't wanted to believe it. Because no kid wants to believe their mother is a liar. And that's when it hit me. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to expose her. I didn't have to turn the kids against her. Because she had already done that herself. And soon, she was going to feel it. So I did the hardest thing a man can do in a moment like that. I smiled. I got up, walked over to the fridge, and grabbed a drink. Sat back down on the couch. Flipped through the channels like nothing had happened. Like my world hadn't just been flipped inside out. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. People always say you don't see it coming. That betrayal blindsides you. That it sneaks up like a thief in the night. But that's not true. The signs are always there. You just don't want to see them. You convince yourself that love means trust, that marriage means security, that the vows you took actually meant something. And so, you ignore the little things. The late nights. The sudden change in perfume. The way she starts dressing up for work like she's preparing for a big event. At the time, you tell yourself it's nothing. That she's just reinventing herself. That maybe she's just trying to feel young again. But later, when the truth smashes through the illusion, you look back and realize she wasn't reinventing anything. She was just making herself look good for someone else. But let me take you back to before all of that. Before the lies, before the deceit. Before my wife turned into someone I didn't recognize. Because the scariest part? She wasn't always like this. I had a good life. A predictable life. And I mean that in the best way possible. I had a wife who greeted me at the door when I came home from work. A house that felt warm even in the dead of winter. and 2 kids who still thought their dad could fix anything, even the impossible. Mornings were always the same, a quiet ritual of normalcy. I'd wake up first, because that's just how it was. Years of routine had wired my body to beat the alarm. I'd slip out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her. The kids' rooms were down the hall, their doors cracked open just enough for me to peek inside. My daughter, tangled in her blankets, face buried in her pillow. My son, sprawled out in that ridiculous way kids sleep, like he'd just survived a wild adventure. They were safe, happy, still untouched by the ugliness of the world. By the time I made it downstairs, the house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the coffee machine and the soft creak of the floorboards as my wife came down to join me. She'd always do this thing where she wrapped herself in a blanket like a burrito and curled up on the couch, watching the news, but not really watching. Just existing in that half-awake state between dreams and reality. "Morning," she'd mumble, voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I'd answer, setting a mug on the table next to her. She'd smile. Not big, not dramatic, just a soft, sleepy smile that made everything feel right. That was my life. And it was good. The days were predictable, but predictable isn't bad when it means stability. Work, home, dinner. Evenings were spent helping the kids with homework, or watching some terrible family movie where my daughter rolled her eyes at every cheesy line and my son laughed way too hard at jokes that weren't funny. My wife would curl up next to me on the couch, legs tucked under her, her head resting on my shoulder. We were a family, a real one. But looking back now, I see the cracks. The little moments that should have made me ask questions. Like how, sometime last year, she started keeping her phone face down on the table. I joked about it, teased her. "What? Got some big secrets on there?" She laughed, brushed it off. "It's just a habit," she said. Or the way she started going to the gym. She had never cared about working out before. But suddenly, it was 4 days a week, then 5. I told myself it was good for her, that maybe she just wanted to feel healthier. But then she started wearing makeup to the gym. Lipstick, perfume, to exercise. That was sign number 2. And then there were the nights. At first, it was just a work event here and there. Then it was a girls' night. Then another. And every time, she'd come home later. Sometimes, I'd wake up at midnight, roll over, and realize the bed was empty. She'd be downstairs, sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. I should have asked. I should have pushed. But I didn't. Because you don't want to believe it's happening to you. You hear about it. You see it in movies, in books, in your buddy's tragic divorce story. But you never think your wife, the woman you built a life with, the mother of your kids, would be capable of it. So you ignore it. You let yourself believe the lies. Because the alternative? The alternative means admitting that the person you love doesn't love you back the same way. And that's a truth most men aren't ready to face. But life doesn't care if you're ready. Because one night, you'll be sitting in the living room with your kids. And your wife, the woman who once wrapped herself in blankets like a burrito and smiled at you over morning coffee, will leave her phone on the counter, unlocked. And your son, the boy who still thinks his father is the strongest man in the world, will read a message meant for another man. And in that moment, everything changes. Not just for you. For them too. It started as something small, insignificant even, the kind of thing that, on any other day, would have meant nothing. A detail so minor that it should have faded into the background of a normal evening. But that's the thing about instincts. They don't need evidence. They just know. And that night, mine were screaming. I came home at 6, like always. The house smelled like roast chicken, which should have been comforting, but something about it felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. The kids were in their usual spots. My son hunched over his math homework at the kitchen table, chewing on the end of his pencil. My daughter curled up on the couch with her phone. But my wife was missing. That wasn't like her. She was always in the kitchen at this time, humming along to whatever playlist she had on, wine glass in one hand, wooden spoon in the other. She loved this time of day. Or at least, she used to. The pot on the stove was simmering, but there was no sign of her. Just an empty space where she should have been. When I asked where she was, my son barely looked up, just mumbled something about her having a headache and going upstairs. That should have been the end of it. Headaches weren't unusual. Stress, bad sleep, too much screen time. 100 harmless reasons. But something about the way he said it, the way he didn't even seem to think it was worth questioning, made me uneasy. Upstairs, The bedroom door was almost closed. Not fully shut, not fully open. Just enough to make it seem like she didn't want to be disturbed, but not so much that she could be accused of hiding. A careful kind of half measure, like so many things lately. I moved quietly, out of habit more than anything. And just before I reached the door, I heard it. A voice. Hers. The words were too soft to make out at first, but the tone was different. Not her usual phone voice, the one she used for catching up with friends or talking to her sister. This was lower, quieter, careful. I stayed where I was, just listening. The pauses told me as much as the words did. Long silences, as if she was waiting for someone else to respond, followed by short, clipped answers. Not casual, not natural. Then, a single word, clear as day, tomorrow. Another pause. Then, I can't tonight. A longer pause. Then, no, he's home. The cold weight in my chest settled in before my brain had even finished processing it. She wasn't talking about the kids. If she had been, she would have said they. But she didn't. Just he. Me. For a long second, I didn't move. I could hear the faint sound of my son erasing something downstairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant buzz of my daughter's phone vibrating against the couch. The sounds of normalcy. But this wasn't normal. The door hinge creaked slightly as I stepped forward, and she reacted too fast. The phone disappeared under the blanket beside her. Her back straightened, her shoulders tensed. Everything about her body language screamed caught. The flicker of something in her eyes, the way her lips pressed together before she smoothed out her expression. But the biggest tell? She didn't smile. She always smiled when she saw me. I stood in the doorway for a second longer than necessary, enough to see the tension in her hands, the way she forced herself to relax. I didn't ask who she was talking to. Didn't demand answers. I didn't need to. The truth was already in the air between us, invisible but suffocating. Instead, I just took in the details. The way her phone screen was now face down, where before she would leave it lying open on the nightstand. The way she exhaled a little too deeply, as if she had been holding her breath. The way she reached for the blanket, pulling it over her legs like a shield, something between us. There was no confrontation, no accusations. Not yet. Instead, I just turned and left. Because I had seen enough. The moment had passed, but the feeling stayed with me. It followed me downstairs, through dinner, through the motions of a normal evening. She came down eventually, acting as if nothing had happened, but it was there, in the way she glanced at her phone every few minutes, the way her posture stiffened when she thought I wasn't looking. She thought she had covered her tracks. That one little slip wouldn't be enough. She was wrong, because I had been blind before. But now I was paying attention. From that moment on, I stopped dismissing the signs. No more second-guessing. No more telling myself I was being paranoid. The whispers, the locked phone, the way she avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. It wasn't in my head. It was happening. And I wasn't about to sit back and let it unfold without knowing every detail. The first thing I did was observe. I didn't confront her, didn't change my routine, didn't let on that I had noticed anything at all. Because the moment she knew I was watching, she would cover her tracks better. And I needed her to stay sloppy. So, I played the role of the clueless husband. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day in the evenings, nodded along when she gave me vague, rehearsed answers. But behind that, I watched. I listened. I waited. The phone was the biggest change. She had never been secretive with it before. Left it on counters, on nightstands, never thought twice about it. But now, it was always with her. Always face down. Always on silent. And more importantly, it was locked. That was new. Before, she never even had a passcode. When I asked about it, casually, over dinner one night, she didn't even look up from her plate. Just muttered something about security and work emails. A lie. I let it slide. Then there were the late nights. They started out infrequent. A work dinner here, a team meeting there. Then, gradually, they became normal. 2, 3 times a week, always with the same excuses, last-minute planning, a new project, someone's birthday. The first time, I believed her. The second time, I was suspicious. By the fourth, I knew exactly what was happening. So I tested her. One Friday, when she told me she had to stay late, I did something different. I said, "I'll come pick you up." It was the easiest offer in the world. If she was really at work, she'd be relieved. If she wasn't, she'd panic. And she did. Her reaction was too fast, too forced. She said there was no need, that she'd be carpooling with a coworker, that it would be too late for me to drive out. It was the way she said it, too rehearsed, too defensive. That was all I needed to hear. She thought she was smart, thought she was careful, but she wasn't. She left breadcrumbs everywhere. The perfume that lingered on her clothes, but not the one she usually wore. The way she started carrying an extra set of clothes in her car, claiming it was for unexpected gym sessions. The new outfits that I never saw her wear around me, tags gone, receipts missing. Then, the final proof. One night, while she was in the shower, her laptop was left open on the coffee table. I never touched her devices before. There was never a reason to. But now, there was every reason. The screen was on, unlocked, sitting right there like an invitation. I moved quickly. Opened tabs. Emails. Messages. At first, nothing. But then, I found it. An Airbnb reservation. A single night booking, 3 weeks ago, under a fake name. But the payment? That was our card. The one we shared. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She was having an affair. And she had been for a while. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. That would come later. What I felt was cold certainty. The game had changed. She thought she was playing me. But now? Now, I was playing her. And she wouldn't even see it coming. There's a moment when suspicion turns into reality, when the last thread of doubt is ripped away, and the truth stands in front of you, bare and undeniable. That moment hit me like a weight in the chest, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. I had known. I had seen the cracks forming, had watched as the woman I once trusted built her life around deception. But knowing something and proving it are two different things. And that night, I finally had proof. It was late. The kids were asleep. She was in the shower again, always at night now, always after coming home late, as if she could wash away the evidence before slipping into bed beside me. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, staring at something I wasn't supposed to see. The proof had come to me accidentally, like fate itself had decided I needed to stop waiting and start acting. Her phone. For weeks, she had been careful, too careful. But people get comfortable. They make mistakes. And tonight, her mistake was a simple one. She had forgotten to close her messaging app on her laptop. One notification. That's all it took. A single pop-up in the corner of the screen, a name I didn't recognize, and a message that ended everything. I miss you already. Last night was perfect. Can't wait for next time. I didn't react. Not immediately. I just sat there, staring at the glowing screen, watching as 3 little dots appeared. He was still typing. Another message popped up, another twist of the knife. Wish you could have stayed longer. Falling asleep alone isn't the same. I exhaled, slow and controlled. Every muscle in my body was tense, but my hands were steady. My heartbeat was calm. Too calm. A part of me had expected this, had been waiting for it. And now that it was here, now that I was looking at the reality of my wife's betrayal in black and white, the emotion I felt wasn't grief. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. I clicked the message. The screen unfolded like a confession, revealing months' worth of texts, plans, excuses, lies. Reservations at hotels, times and dates that perfectly aligned with her work meetings and late nights. She had played her part well, weaving a story of a busy career, a schedule full of obligations, while she was really spending time with someone else. Oliver. That was his name. Oliver. A stranger. A name I had never heard before. A person who had been living in the shadows of my life, taking what was mine, laughing behind my back. I felt nothing for him. He was just a symptom. She was the problem. The messages kept coming. Some long, some short, some overly affectionate. Words meant for him. Words that should have been mine. She told him she missed him. She told him she loved him. She loved him. Not me. Not the father of her children. Not the man who had built a life with her. Him. The bathroom door opened. Steam rolled out into the hallway. And then there she was, towel wrapped around her body, hair damp, skin glowing under the soft light. She looked untouched. Innocent. A liar. She caught my expression immediately. I saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Concern? Guilt? Fear? She knew. Maybe not exactly what, but she felt it. The shift in the air. The way I wasn't looking at her like I usually did. She opened her mouth, probably to say something casual, something normal, but I didn't give her the chance. I lifted my hand, turning the laptop screen toward her, letting her see exactly what I had been looking at for the past 10 minutes. Her face drained of color. For the first time in weeks, she didn't have a lie ready. No quick excuse, no desperate attempt to turn the blame on me. Just silence. And in that silence, I made my decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to demand answers that wouldn't change anything. I was going to end this. But not yet. Not before she felt the weight of what she had done. Not before she lost everything. I closed the laptop. Stood up. Walked past her without a word. She tried to speak then, tried to call my name, reach for my arm. But I was already gone. And the real game had just begun. Rage is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment, makes men reckless. And reckless men make mistakes. I wasn't going to make mistakes. Not now. Not when the truth had been laid out so perfectly in front of me. Not when I had all the power. She thought she had control. That she had outmaneuvered me. That I was just some fool stumbling in the dark while she carried on behind my back. But she was wrong. Because the moment I saw those messages, the moment I heard my son ask who's Oliver, something inside me snapped into place. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Purpose. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted precision. A plan so perfect, so complete, that by the time she realized what had happened, she would be standing in the ruins of everything she had once taken for granted. And the best part? I wouldn't have to raise my voice. I wouldn't have to lift a finger. I would let her ruin herself. I started with the bank accounts. Our finances had always been joint, a system built on trust. The kind of trust that used to mean something. That was over. I spent the next 2 nights moving money, slowly, carefully, just enough at a time that she wouldn't notice until it was too late. Offshore accounts. Personal investments. Funds transferred into an account she wasn't connected to. By the end of it, I had ensured that every single dollar legally mine would stay that way. She would be left with what little was in her personal checking, just enough to keep her comfortable for now. Then came the house. We owned it together, but the mortgage? That was in my name. A little detail she had never cared about because she never imagined a world where she wouldn't be living in it. I made the call to the bank, restructured the loan, and started the paperwork to put it up for sale. By the time she figured it out, the house would be gone. Her home, her stability vanished. But that wasn't enough. This wasn't about money. This was about making sure she felt every ounce of betrayal she had handed me. And the most powerful part? I wouldn't be the one exposing her. Her own children would. She had built a lie, crafted a second life around secrecy, around the assumption that she could keep everything separate. But secrets have a way of unraveling. And children see more than we think. I didn't have to turn them against her. She had already started the process herself. The absences, the lies, the whispered phone calls, she had underestimated their intelligence. I wouldn't have to say a word. I would simply let them see her for who she was. And then there was Oliver. He was a wild card. A name on a screen, a ghost in my wife's messages. But no man goes this deep into an affair without leaving a trail. I had his number, his face, his messages. And now? I had his weakness. A little digging, and I found it. A wife. A life he had been so careful to keep intact while he played with mine. I wasn't going to send anonymous messages or vague warnings. That would be too simple. No, I was going to hand-deliver the truth to the one person he had worked so hard to keep in the dark. I gathered everything: texts, screenshots, hotel bookings, a timeline so thorough it would burn his marriage to the ground. And when the moment was right, I would make sure she received it personally. The final piece of the puzzle was her job. My wife's career wasn't just a paycheck. It was her identity. The title, the promotions, the respect, she thrived on it. And she had made the fatal mistake of mixing business with pleasure. The company had policies. Strict ones. Affairs with clients, conflicts of interest, terminations had been issued over less. A well-placed tip, a collection of time-stamped proof, and a little strategic timing during the next office review would be more than enough. She had spent years building her reputation. It would take me a single email to shatter it. When it was all done, when every piece was in place, I sat back and let it settle. This wasn't just revenge. This was a masterpiece. And the best part? She wouldn't even see it coming. I moved carefully. Every step had to be calculated, every move precise. There was no room for error, no place for impulsive action. A good plan doesn't just expose the guilty, it leaves them nowhere to run. And when the moment comes, it crushes them completely. That moment was coming. The first strike was financial. I had been shifting our money for weeks, draining every shared account, closing every joint investment. She hadn't noticed. Of course, she hadn't. Why would she? She had been too busy sneaking off to hotels, sending whispered messages, living in her fantasy. But reality was about to hit her hard. The bank notifications went out in the morning. Every card in her name was declined. The emergency funds she assumed we had? Gone. She would start the day thinking it was some kind of mistake. Maybe a technical glitch. Maybe something easily fixable. But as the hours passed, as she made frantic calls to the bank, as she logged in and saw nothing but a balance too small to sustain her, panic would set in. And I wanted her panicked. While she was scrambling to understand what was happening, the second strike hit. The house, her sanctuary, her comfort, the place she believed was untouchable, was gone. She didn't own it. She had never paid attention to the details, never questioned whose name was really on the mortgage. The real estate agent's call would come around noon, just as she was recovering from the financial shock. The house had been sold. The paperwork finalized. The only thing left was a deadline. She had 30 days to leave. Not 60, not 90. 30. Enough time to process the loss, but not enough to stop it. She would have to pack her bags and walk away from the home she thought was hers forever. But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. That night, I set the final stage. The one where she would have to face the truth, not just from me, but from the people who mattered most. Our children. I made sure everything was in place. Her laptop, left open on the coffee table, the messages still visible. Her phone, unlocked, just for long enough. The evidence, placed where curious eyes could find it. It was her own actions that would expose her, not my words. I wanted them to see it, them to understand. Because once they knew, once they truly saw who she was, she would never get their trust back. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, I delivered the final blow. She came home late, expecting everything to be normal, expecting me to be sitting there like a fool, waiting for her. Instead, she walked into chaos. Our daughter stood in the living room, phone in hand, her face pale, her hands shaking. My son sat on the couch, silent, his head down, refusing to look at her. The room was heavy with something unspoken, but she felt it instantly. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Her eyes flickered to the laptop, the messages still open. She froze. Her breath hitched. Her hands twitched at her sides. She knew. And then, our daughter spoke. Not in anger, not in rage, just pure, devastating disappointment. How could you? That was it. 3 words. 3 words that shattered her more than any screaming, any confrontation ever could. Her lips parted, desperate to explain, to deny, to twist the truth into something she could control. But it was too late. Our son lifted his head then, his eyes filled with something even worse than sadness, disgust. She reached for them. Instinct, desperation, panic all blending together. But they both pulled away. And then, I finally spoke. You did this to yourself. I left her standing there, drowning in her own betrayal, watching as everything crumbled around her. No screaming. No accusations. Just silence. The kind of silence that destroys. She had nowhere to go. And she knew it. She stood there, frozen, her face drained of color, her breathing shallow and uneven. Her eyes darted between the laptop screen, the phone in our daughter's trembling hands, and my face, searching for something. A way out. A chance to explain. But there was no escape, and she knew it. The walls were closing in. The web of lies she had spun so carefully was unraveling before her eyes, thread by thread, exposing everything. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. A sharp inhale, then a shaking exhale. Panic. Pure, raw panic. Her gaze locked onto our daughter first, the one person she thought would always defend her. But the look she got in return was colder than anything I could have given. Not anger. Not hatred. Something worse. Disgust. That deep, sinking disappointment that no amount of apologizing could fix. It's not what it looks like, she finally managed, her voice cracking under the weight of her own guilt. Silence. No one believed her. Not even she believed herself. She turned to our son next, desperate, pleading. He wouldn't even look at her. His jaw clenched, his hands gripping his knees like he was trying to hold himself together. I knew that look. That was my look. The one I had worn the night I found out. The moment when respect dies, and there's nothing left but emptiness. Her breath quickened. Her fingers curled into her sleeves, gripping the fabric as if she could physically hold onto the life she had just lost. Please, she whispered, stepping toward them, her arms half outstretched, reaching for something she would never get back. You have to believe me. I love you. I love. Stop. My voice cut through the room like a blade. Calm. Steady. Absolute. She flinched. For the first time in years, I was the one in control. She turned to me then, as if I was her last hope, as if I would be the one to save her. But there was nothing left to save. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over, streaking down her face. The same face that had smiled at me while lying. The same lips that had spoken words meant for someone else. I can explain, she choked out, her voice barely more than a breath. I tilted my head slightly, studying her like a stranger. Like something unfamiliar, something distant. Explain. I repeated, letting the word hang between us. Then I nodded toward the screen, toward her own words, still glowing in the dim light of the living room. Go ahead. Explain that. She turned, looked at the messages, the texts, the dates, the hotel confirmations. Everything. Proof so undeniable that even she couldn't spin a story around it. Her lips trembled. Then, the sobbing began. Not soft. Not quiet. Messy. Loud. Desperate. She dropped to her knees. Right there, in the center of the living room, in front of the children she had betrayed. Her shoulders shook as she gasped for air between her broken cries, hands pressed against her face as if she could hide from what was happening. As if closing her eyes would make it all disappear. But it wouldn't. It was real. And it was over. I made a mistake, she finally managed, her voice thick with desperation. Please, please don't do this to me. Do this to her? I almost laughed. She had done this to herself. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just let her sit in it, let her drown in the weight of her own choices. Every second stretched on, unbearable, suffocating. She wasn't crying because she regretted what she had done. She was crying because she had been caught. Because the illusion of control was gone. Because I was the one holding all the power now. She turned back to the kids, eyes swollen, cheeks flushed, her breath shaky. Please, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. You have to believe me. No response. She sobbed harder. Then, finally, our daughter spoke. No, she said. Just one word. Cold. Final. The air in the room shifted. My wife's breath hitched, like she had been physically struck. She reached forward again, her hands trembling, but the damage was done. They had seen her for who she really was. And there was no coming back from that. Slowly, I stood, adjusting my watch, straightening my shirt. The movement felt foreign, as if I was stepping into a new version of myself. One without her. One that had already moved on. I want you out, I said, my voice quiet but firm. She froze. Her head snapped toward me, eyes wide, as if she hadn't realized until now that this was really happening. No, wait, please, she scrambled to her feet, stepping toward me, hands outstretched. Let's talk about this. We can fix this, Aya. There's nothing to fix, I cut her off. Not anymore. She opened her mouth again, but this time, nothing came out. She knew. There was no argument she could make, no excuse she could offer, no manipulation that would work. Everything she had depended on was gone. I gestured toward the front door. Go. Tears streamed down her face, her hands still shaking as she stood there, trapped between begging and accepting reality. But reality had already been decided, and she had no place in mine. I waited. I didn't move until she did. Until she turned, broken and crumbling, and walked toward the door, the same door she had walked through so many times without a second thought. The same door she had come home through after sneaking off with someone else. But this time, she wasn't coming back. The door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, she was gone. She was gone. The door had closed behind her, but the echoes of her choices lingered like the scent of a burned-out fire, ashes and nothing more. She left thinking she could fix it, that maybe with time, with the right words, she could convince me, convince the kids, convince herself that what she had done wasn't the end of everything. But reality doesn't bend for liars. And her reality was about to collapse. It didn't take long for the world to turn against her. It started small. The first cracks appeared when the kids refused to answer her calls. They weren't angry, not in the way she had expected. They were indifferent. That was worse. Anger meant they still cared. But indifference? That meant she had already lost them. They saw her messages, ignored them. Saw her name flash on the screen and let it ring. She begged, she apologized, she sent long, desperate texts trying to explain herself, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But silence was the only response. Her own children had erased her. Then came the financial ruin. The house? Gone. She tried to fight it, but the paperwork was airtight. She had no claim, no way to stop the inevitable. She had assumed she would have time, that she could figure something out. But when she arrived one evening to collect her things, she found the locks changed, her key useless in the door. Her belongings? Already packed and waiting. I didn't need to say anything. She stood on the porch, tears in her eyes, realizing that she was officially homeless. She had a place to stay, at least for now. A friend, maybe, or some cheap rental. But it wouldn't last. Not when the money she thought she had was gone. She called the bank. She argued. But the truth hit her harder than anything else. She had nothing left. But the worst part, the part she never saw coming, the social fallout. She thought she could control the narrative. Maybe spin the story, paint herself as a victim. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. Especially not when I made sure they didn't. It started with Oliver. His wife had received everything. Screenshots, receipts, hotel bookings, the full timeline of betrayal laid out so perfectly that there was no room for doubt. And just like that, he was ruined too. His wife didn't just leave, she took everything. The house, the kids, the reputation he had worked so hard to maintain. And in his panic, in his desperation to save what little he had left, he did exactly what I knew he would. He blamed her. He turned on my wife like a drowning man grasping for air, shifting the guilt, making her out to be the mastermind, the one who had manipulated him, the one who had led him down this path. He painted himself as weak, as a man drawn into mistakes, and while that didn't save him, it ensured that she fell harder. His wife told their mutual friends. Their friends told others. And soon, her name became synonymous with disgrace. Her job was next. The office affair? Exposed. Not by me. I never had to send a single email. The rumors did all the work. The hushed conversations in hallways, the way colleagues looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. She tried to act like it wasn't happening. Kept showing up, pretending everything was fine. But there's a certain weight in knowing that every single person around you knows exactly who you are. The HR meeting came soon after. They phrased it politely, of course, a professional decision, a mutual separation. But in the end, it was what it always was. She was fired. And that's when she broke. She called me. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. Messages, voicemails, long rambling confessions laced with regret and self-pity. She missed me. She missed the kids. She was sorry. She had been foolish, selfish, blinded by something that didn't matter. She wanted to come back. But there was nothing left to come back to. I let her voice echo in the void. No response. No closure. Just silence. The same silence she had given me every time she came home late, every time she looked me in the eye and lied. And while she fell, I thrived. The kids? They stayed with me. They never questioned it. There was no custody battle, no desperate tug-of-war. She had lost them the moment they saw the truth. I moved forward, stronger than before, free from the weight of someone who never deserved me. I built a life that no longer had space for her in it. She, on the other hand, had nothing but time. Time to think, to regret, to sit alone in a world that had moved on without her. And I never looked back. There's something strangely poetic about watching someone destroy themselves. You don't have to push, don't have to force anything. Just step back and let gravity do its work. That's exactly what happened to her. She spent months thinking she was in control, weaving a lie so intricate she believed it herself. And then, when the truth came crashing down, when the weight of her own betrayal smothered her, she realized too late. There was nothing left to hold on to. No family, no home, no career. Just regret. Just the echo of choices she could never take back. She still reaches out sometimes. The messages are fewer now, but they come in waves. Late at night, long apologies that mean nothing. Desperate attempts at conversation. She says she's changed. That she's learned her lesson. That she'd give anything for a second chance. But that's the thing about burning bridges, you don't get to decide when they can be rebuilt. Some things turn to ashes and stay that way. She's renting a small apartment now, from what I've heard. She's not the same woman who once stood in our kitchen, laughing over morning coffee. She's smaller now. Not physically, just diminished. The shine she used to have, the confidence she once carried so effortlessly, it's all gone. That's what happens when the world sees you for who you really are. There's no coming back from that. The kids? They don't hate her. But they don't love her the same way anymore, either. There's a distance now, one she will never be able to close. And the worst part? She knows it. She sits across from them in the rare moments they agree to see her, watches them with eyes full of longing, but they don't reach for her the way they used to. They don't trust her anymore. That's a loss she will have to carry for the rest of her life. As for me, I've never felt more free. She thought she was taking something from me when she chose to betray me, but in the end, she gave me something instead. A new life. One without her. One where I wake up without a knot in my stomach, without doubts, without the lingering feeling that something isn't right. I live on my own terms now. Stronger. Wiser. Unapologetically moving forward while she drowns in the consequences of her own actions. And that's the thing about betrayal, it's never really about the person you hurt. It's about what you lose in the process. She lost everything. And I? I lost nothing worth keeping. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done?